Larry Hughes is going to pop out and get the ball. Jordan's going to rub his man off of Leitner and then cut down the center and gets a nice pass from Larry Hughes.
Long rebound, Hughes. Fake, jumper is good.
Give it to me, Larry. Give it to me, Larry Hughes.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Believe in Wizards. Obviously, we've been on a little hiatus here. There hasn't been much Wizards news during this part of the offseason, so Larry and I took a little time off, but we're looking forward to getting back into it. Larry's not going to be joining me today. Instead, I have Osman Beg from Bullets Forever. He's basically the man behind the Bullets Forever Twitter account, so any of the funny posts and things like that you've seen from that account come from him. And one of the most diehard Wizards fans on basically in the DC metro area. So really appreciate him coming on here to talk about this team. And we're going to get into a lot of good stuff here today. But before we get going, just want to knock out a couple ad reads for you. As always, we've got Bet Online. So it's that time of year again. All eyes are now turning to football as teams are back on the gridiron and ready to start football season. As always, Bet Online is your number one spot for all of the pro and college football action taking place this season. So get all the updated odds, props, and contests, including the biggest online $500,000 NFL mega contest and the world's largest $200,000 NFL Survivor contest opening now at Bet Online. So head on over to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today to receive your 100% off welcome bonus. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. And our second ad for the week, we've had them for a couple weeks now with us, Balance 7. So I don't know if you heard, but apparently former NBA player Lamar Odom may be returning to professional basketball in Spain soon. Apparently he's going to try out for Pau Gasol's team. He's been taking a new product that he credits a lot of his improvement to, Balance 7. Balance 7 is a pH balancing alkaline supplement drink. It's like vitamins or supplements, but in liquid form. Just 1 ounce a day, 3 times a day, and in a week, you'll see lots of effects. You're getting older, man. I don't know. I can relate to where Lamar's at. I played a little hoops this morning, and I could definitely use something to give me a little boost here. So I don't blame him for giving this a try, and I wouldn't blame you for trying it either. So you can see how Balance 7 has really helped. And right now, if you go to balance7.com and use the promo code BELIEVE, you'll get $10 off their 32-ounce bottle. The bottle lasts 11 days, which is the perfect amount of time to feel the pH balancing drink begin to take effect. Again, that's balance7.com and use the code BELIEVE, BLEAV, at checkout. I did. And hey, look, I made a couple jumpers this week, so it's a step in the right direction. And, we'll see if any of the Wizards need to take that by midseason. All right. Yeah, let's get to the show here. And next voice you'll hear in a second will be me and Oz breaking down the Wizards' upcoming season. All right. I'm now joined by the brains behind the Bullets Forever Twitter account. Oz, thanks for joining me, man.
Hey, Matt. Absolutely. I don't know if you should kind of put that out there. Some of the, the Russ Hive, the Russ cult might be a little upset for you to know that it's actually me, but, why not? They can bring it on.
There's a group of us. How about that?
Yeah.
We'll give you credit for all the funny ones. The rest of us will take the hit for gaslighting the crazies. We will circle back around to that one. There'll be a little Russ talk here today for folks. But I think the first thing I want to talk about is just NBA 2K ratings. We have not done a show since all this came out, and it was such a big deal. I really can't understand why. And first of all, one, do you remotely care about 2K ratings and what players for the Wizards get?
Absolutely not. So I play 2K. I mean, I like playing it. I got 2 younger kids, so I play with the boys. They like playing 2K, and I have a good time. I'll create my own character and and do all that type of stuff. But when it comes to actual ratings for players on the Wizards, I could care less. I guess I could see if you're a player, you're probably like a little offended by, but hey,
Sure.
Why am I that? But I think way too much is made out of it. There's so many more deserving accolades that players should be chasing that it is so irrelevant,
Let me just say this before I get some hate from a different fan base here, but I really like Bradley Beal overall, but it does bother me that the thing he seems most animated about are things like 2K ratings and all-star votes, and not the fact that ESPN projects them to finish 12th in the Eastern Conference. Like, I'd love to see him retweet that and be like, feel slighted by that. But an 89 on 2K gets like multiple tweets from his entire family tree for a month. So I'm curious how you feel about that one.
I completely agree. So I'm a Brad fan I think he's a great player. I think he's developed so much in his time here. He's a great guy. Seems like the perfect guy that you kind of want to build a team around. I don't really understand kind of the obsession. I guess all-star votes make a little more sense. I'm sure there's some contractual things there. There's some pure respect, coaches respect, things like that you could take out of it.
Right.
But I can't say that it doesn't always catch my guard catch me off. I wouldn't say off guard, but catch my attention that all-star snubs, all NBA snubs, now 2K ratings really get a big reaction from him and kind of, from the whole Brad Beal kind of contingent out there, and like you said, the ESPN power rankings, top 12, the Wizards were projected to be 12th, right?
11th or 12th, something like that, but out of the playoffs.
There was absolutely nothing on that.
Yeah.
That's his team. He's the face of the franchise. Shouldn't he be more offended by that than what his 2K rating is? It's just beyond comprehension.
If you want respect, I would think leading a team that people don't think should make the playoffs through the playoffs is the best way to get that, not who voted you into the All-Star game.
I agree, but I think kind of where I am with him sometimes is that his place on the Wizards, he is the franchise here. But if he does well, it's great. It's like, look how great Brad did. If they lose, it's like, poor Brad, free Brad. Yeah. You get the gifts, you get the memes of him looking frustrated on the bench, and everyone's like, oh, please, somebody rescue him from there as he continues to sign contract extension after contract extension here. So at some point, own it. Like, if you want to stay. If you want to win, probably have to go somewhere else, and ask.
Yeah, I totally agree. Again, overall, Beal does way more good than bad. It just every once in a while, something will get retweeted a couple too many times, and I get a little tweaked by it. But just since we're on it, is 89 too low for the guy?
So I haven't done this yet. I wanted to do it just kind of for fun. Was like build a player as to how I perceive his attributes, and like his 3-point shooting is down a little bit. His defense has taken a big step back since early in his career. Turns it over a bit much. So kind of when you build a player with those attributes, where would they really, they're not going to be a 94 or 95. They're going to be an 89, maybe a 90.
Sure.
And if it's a 90 versus an 89, is he all of a sudden happy with that? I don't know.
That's what I said. Like 88 to 92 was the range for me. Anywhere in there, I would not have an issue. So some of the ones that were a little surprised to me, like Rui being 78, like, okay, maybe that's a touch low, but when you think that like Trey Burke is a 76,
right?
Like Rui is a considerably better player to me than Trey Burke is. So things like that were kind of hard to reconcile, I think.
There are a couple of odd ratings. At the same time, how much time did they really spend on Rui coming up with a rating? So you can kind of probably understand that. I think at best he'd probably be like an 80 if they really focused in on him. But yeah, there are definitely some that always like, hey, that doesn't really make sense. But with the updates that they always do, as the season goes on, players have the opportunity to correct it themselves.
I hope that by the end of the season, everyone on the Wizards is much higher than they started. That'll be a good sign for how the team did. Just kind of segueing into something that's almost equally as stupid, in my opinion. Do you ever feel like you learn anything of value from these off-season workout videos?
So no, and it's really my least favorite part of the offseason. There was a point where I'd be like, oh, okay, Wall's putting out an offseason video. Hey, his jump shot looks a little better. And it's kind of something that I think I've learned. I've watched the videos, and then the player would come back the same.
Yep.
So at some point, stop paying attention to the videos. Like Ben Simmons every summer is hitting threes left and right. When the season starts, he won't even take a three. John Wall's shot has stayed the same. There are a couple players who, like when you watch the Drew Hanlon videos and you see the kind of the work that they do, you could actually see some of the moves that his group of players that he works with translate to the floor. So I see some of that there, and credit to them for kind of taking what they do in the summer, applying it to the floor, to when they get on the floor. But at the same time, especially playing pickup and what have you, I just really take nothing out of it. It's just something. It's content for people who just want basketball content over the summer. But every time like one of those aggregate sites like tweets out something like, "Oh, look out, he could shoot now."
No.
That player still can't shoot in October.
Yeah. Ben Simmons has become Steph Curry. I was telling a friend the other day that I went to a Wizards game in like the 9-game stretch that Dwight Howard was here, and he hit like 17 consecutive threes in shoot around. I'm like, unguarded, any NBA player, like this guy's a 60% free throw shooter. He can hit 100% of his threes, unguarded. So I was kind of trying to look at that.
Yeah,
with that,
I think people need to. If you come out early to a game, you see that these guys just don't miss.
Yeah.
I saw Jan Vesely hit like 7 straight threes during a pregame shoot around. Like I think it was his rookie season, maybe. But we know he's not going to make that in a game. And it's also funny to me when they're like, "Oh, this guy is learning. Hey, look at this player. Player X is learning how to shoot, but he's shooting from the high school 3-point line in a gym that they just rented out." It just cracks me up.
The only thing I do think that it provides some value for is a situation like a Spencer Dinwiddie, where the injury thing was like, will he be ready? Will he won't be ready? The videos they've shown of him, he looks kind of explosive. He looks healthy and dynamic. So like that, I'm happy to see. But, if he suddenly had like knockdown 3-point shooting as well, I wouldn't expect to see that during the season.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. With Dinwiddie, I see him make threes in these videos. I don't expect him to be a 40% 3-point shooter, but it is good to see him healthy, and you kind of get a better idea of what his ISO game looks like in some of these situations. And it wouldn't surprise me if you see some of that translate over to the floor.
Yeah, I totally agree. All right. So you and I had a healthy, respectful Twitter exchange the other week about who the forward should be this week. And I really wanted to just sort of tease that out, starting with, forward spot specifically, but kind of go across the whole starting lineup here. And I think we were both agreed that Rui is going to be a starter on this team. And the other question is, who is at the other forward spot? I think I was pro KCP, at least to start the season, just to kind of have somebody solid there. And then if Kuzma's playing well enough, maybe you transition to that. I think you were ready to see Kuzma come out of the gate and didn't think there was much of a difference from them defensively, and that Kuzma's the bigger threat offensively. But I want to let you make the case there. Like who should the forwards be to start the year?
So let's start at the 4. There's no reason to think Rui's not going to be the 4. So I don't think that's really worth a big debate. There is always Wizards Twitter just goes back and forth on Rui, and the conversation is just kind of a little silly. A lot of it is based on pre-draft. Hey, I didn't want him pre-draft, so whenever he has a bad game, I'm going to tweet something negatively about him. And then kind of the straw man becomes, hey, everyone who likes him thinks he's going to become Kawhi Leonard. No one thinks that. I haven't heard anyone say, hey, people have said, oh, he has some similar characteristics to when he plays. You can see the mid-range stuff.
Big
Looks
hands.
a little familiar. Right. Big hands. Exactly. But no one is saying, hey, we have Kawhi Leonard. We just have to give him the ball more. No one is saying that. But I think I'll touch base on him quickly. He finished the season very strongly. His 3-point shooting for the season was 33%. If you actually add the play-in game and the playoffs on the aggregate, regular season play-in playoffs, his 3-point percentage was 36%, which is probably higher than, whenever people talk about it, it's, he's like
he's
a
low
32,
30s.
Yeah, exactly. But when you take the largest sample size, it's up to 36%. Now, if he was a 33% 3-point shooter, but he went to the playoffs and was hesitant and shot 20%, then you'd probably look at that 33% and say, hey, that may be inflated. He still has a lot of work to do there. The fact that he built on it, took it to the next level, like as the season closed, makes you think, okay, there is definitely, he went from 28 to 33. He did 36 if you take everything together. Could he be a 36, 37% 3-point shooter? Why not?
Yeah.
I think the bigger thing with him is volume. Like, will he be willing to take that many threes? I think he did was it game 4 that they beat Philadelphia?
Yeah, there were 2 games in that stretch where he looked considerably more comfortable just catching it and shooting it right away.
Right. And I think he may have taken 7 3-point attempts in that game 4 win over Philadelphia. So that was like a good example of what you want to see from him. But kind of what he has to do is just, what I see is like he has good stretches for 10 games and he has really ice cold stretches for 10 games. And he really has to just iron that out. If he could just at least be even, just, play just average and not have those big dips, then I think he'll be much better. But kind of going to why I think Kuzma, at first I thought KCP should start. But then the more I thought about it, the Wizards are a small team. They have a 6'3" shooting guard in Brad Beal. You'd have a 6'4" small forward. Now, Caldwell Pope is a good defensive player, but going up against Jaylen Browns, Jason Tatum's, bigger forwards, would he start getting kind of overpowered? And then I think that could then kind of affect his shooting because like he's just always getting worn out playing against bigger players. And then I was thinking, like, are the Wizards in position where they should be making a lineup for fit, or do they really need to still just put the best player in the lineup? Sure. And I think Kuzma, out of the guys who came from LA, probably has a chance to be the best overall player. But for everything I've read is that his defense improved in LA. His 3-point shooting got up to 36%. I believe he's 38% on catch and shoot. And the interesting thing is everyone cites Caldwell Pope's 3-point shooting. But, and I did some stats. I looked at some stats before I jumped on here. He is actually only averaged, and you kind of picture KCP kind of just standing in the corner shooting threes. He's only taken 3.5 and 4.4 3-point attempts over the past 2 seasons.
Sure.
Kuzma is averaging 5.5 for his career. Mm-hmm. So if he's hitting, and I don't expect him to take many off the dribble threes here. That shouldn't be what they plan around. But if he is taking 5.5 or somewhere around 6 3-point attempts and shooting his 38% catch and shoot rate, that's, I think, good enough for spacing. I think that's a player that teams are going to have to respect. They're going to have to close out on him, and he's shown the ability to beat the closeout. The other thing is he's taller. He's about 6'8", 6'9". Rui is 6'8", 6'9". You could
6'10" if you believe the recent Quentin Mayo tweets.
So if you have 2 guys there, if you recall the first playing game against Boston, Rui got in foul trouble and Jason Tatum kind of went to work on a lot of small defenders. You kind of remove that from the equation if you have Kuzma and Rui, because then they're very interchangeable. You don't have to just rely on one player to take that big wing. You could interchange over there. And I think that could be helpful. It's also a roster balance issue where you don't have much guard depth. You have a ton of forwards. By doing it this way, Caldwell Pope could back up Beal, and he'll still play some minutes at the 3 over the course of a game.
So let me devil's advocate a little bit, because I agree with everything you said there. The only reason why I would consider doing it the other way is I think there's more to Kuzma's game than just a catch and shoot player. Like, I do actually think he can be a little more versatile than he's been able to show this far. And, he's just going to get the ball and more opportunities to show that against a second unit. And they're going to feature Rui more. Dinwiddie's going to look to establish himself. Beal's going to shoot. Like, we'll figure out the center in a minute. But either way, it's probably some touches there. There's only so much love Kuzma's going to get in that starting 5, whereas maybe if he's the first guy off the bench or whatever, at least you give him a little opportunity to kind of cook and do his thing and, kind of figure that out a little bit. So that's maybe why I would make that case. But if he looks like the defender he looked like in their bubble playoff run, then shit, he might just be so good you can't avoid it. So that's sort of the question for me is I know KCP will spot up and I know he'll play good defense. Kuzma, I think, can do more. You just don't see it all the time yet. So maybe you kind of let him ease into a new situation. But either way, I think this is the best shape they've been in at the small forward spot in 6 or 7 years, probably.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And I do agree with your point. Your point makes a lot of sense because you still have 2 would-be high volume guys at guard. You want to get Rui more touches than he got last year. You want his field goal attempts and his aggressiveness to go up. But instead of maybe relying on him to be a 20-point per game scorer, if him and Kuzma could kind of share the load, each put in 15 to 16 a night, maybe that works well. I'm not sure. That is a good point. You don't have, we'll talk about the center later, depending on how much the center needs the ball also, that could factor into this. I just think they would be, if you have 4 players 1 through 4 who need to be covered or accounted for when they're on the floor, it could put more pressure on the defenses, especially in the regular season.
I think that, again, I'm with you. And I think either way, I'm cool with it. It means we've got a pretty good group with either of those guys, I think. But this Wizards starting 5, whatever it looks like, it's not going to be some kind of juggernaut starting 5 where we're going to overwhelm you because we're so top heavy. I think their best bet is our bench is so solid. There's not much of a drop off and your scrubs are going to come in and we're just going to overwhelm them that. Right. That's kind of what I think will carry them over the course of the season. This COVID stuff is still kind of lingering. So if you've got certain marquee players on the Wizards that refuse to get vaccinated, does that become an issue? So I think the fact that they're deep this year specifically is a huge leg up over last
Right.
year. And I think that's something that people, when they come up with these sort of like win projections, are undervaluing, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think I looking back, I believe so. I don't know how in the bubble season. If you look at it pre-bubble, they were on pace to beat their win
Mhm.
totals, and I think last year they did also. I think it's the Wizards are a weird team for national people to kind of evaluate. They don't. It seems like national pundits don't actually like the Wizards because they want them to pick a direction, and unless you kind
It's
of
more
go
fun
by,
to trade Beal.
it's more fun to trade Beal, and if they're not trading Beal, they're just frustrated they're not trading Beal. So they kind of just say, "What are they doing? They stink. They're going to win 20 games every year." And it seems like every year they kind of exceed the hurdle. So I think they'll do the same this year.
It doesn't surprise me. I think I saw the projection this year was for 38. So that puts them below 500. So,
Right. I
eh.
think it was 34, but you could be
Oh,
right.
no, you're right. You're 100% right.
34?
It was
Okay.
34. And I was thinking about like, okay, in a 72 game season, that wouldn't have been as terrible. But now that we're back to the 82, that seems particularly disrespectful to me. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. And then you have, I mean, I guess kind of leading to the other part of the forward discussion, you have players that last year were pegged to be starters. Now they're going to be fighting for backup minutes. So your depth, that like you said, the depth is there. So instead of Denny starting at the 3, now he's going to be competing for minutes as the backup 3.
Mhm.
And they're just a deeper team. Like, we haven't talked about like Montrezl Harrell's going to play the center, backup center probably role, but he's a guy who just eats in the regular season. And that his energy level, his ability to do that against second units is what gets you wins in the regular season. I'm not saying it's going to work in the playoffs, and they could easily just, if they get to the playoffs, lose in the play-in or lose in the first round. But I think they're built to be a pretty decent regular season team. Not a good, but just pretty decent,
I think somewhere around 500 is kind of what I would suggest. Maybe a little less. Maybe they get hot or make a big trade and they go a couple above.
And I don't expect Bertans to actually be as bad as he was last year, kind of going back to the forward discussion. Like if he comes in, it would be a bad look if he comes in as out of shape as he did last year. So
it seems almost impossible that that's the case, I would hope.
So if he does, that's like another player that was playing 30 minutes a game that doesn't have that role anymore. But if he could hit threes for 20 minutes a game, that's like an added bonus and another thing that just adds to their regular season build.
Throwing out last year's team, but it kind of reminds me of like the Pacers team in the last couple of years before that, where like no like overwhelming star power. I mean, obviously we have Brad and stuff, but it's mostly just like here are 10 to 12 like competent adults that you can put in at any time, and there's not a big drop off. And like you said, I think that wins you regular season games most of the time.
Right. There's no Chandler Hutchinson starting on this team anymore.
It is really crazy to think about the people that they rolled out at small forward last year, and that, in my opinion, is the most important swing position in the league to be able to determine whether or not you're a good team. Do you have competent wing depth? And now they at least seem to have that. So Kyle Kuzma got asked about their quote glut of wings in a presser a couple weeks ago, and said, I think you've got to realize, like, I'm not going to say it's a logjam, but if you look at the landscape of the NBA, teams always have a bunch of guys that are 6'6" and above that can all play on the court at the same time. This league is transformed into kind of positionless. If you have guys that know how to play basketball and know how to defend at a high level, now you're in business. I think that totally is in line with, what we just spent the last 5 minutes on. So I'm glad Kuzma gets where we're coming from.
Right.
And he followed it up with, it's a good problem for Wes and the organization to have. I like to call them, quote, successful people problems, because we have a lot of great and talented players on one roster. It's always about sacrifice and trying to win. Does that concern you at all when you have 12 guys that now there's like some ego and shit like that you have to juggle and manage for a new coach?
To a degree, the coach can't try to play too many players. So Wes Unseld Jr., if he's going with a 12-man rotation just to kind of keep everybody happy, it's not going to work because no one's going to get into rhythm then, except for the primary ball handlers. So I think you got to still make the tough decisions. You got to pick your 10-man rotation, and you just have to play the guys. And if someone's out of the rotation, They're out of the rotation until somebody either plays their way out of the rotation or someone gets injured or what have you. But you have to just do that because, and we've seen it. I think it was Scott Brooks did that, and it kind of bothered me. It was pretty obvious, Raul Neto should have been the backup point guard last year.
Sure.
But he forced Ish Smith in as the first reserve point guard, and then when with that 3-guard point guard lineup, because he didn't want to disrespect Ish Smith, but he also had to play Neto, who just clearly should have been on the
too good
floor.
not to play. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. You have to make the decisions, and if players are upset about that, well, frankly, I don't
play better.
Play better. And like, if let's say a Davis Bertans is playing 20 minutes instead of 30 minutes that he's used to, and if he's upset about that, well, I was like, you put yourself in that position by having a poor season last season. So if you want to play more, you have to show that you can defend. Like, there's no spot that should be given to a player that is totally indifferent on the defensive side of the floor anymore. Like, with that many players, like, you play your specialists, but then you limit their exposure.
Yeah, you don't have to pace yourself now because the team has enough depth where you're not trying to, can I make it 30 minutes tonight? I think that's a great point. And one of the things Larry always talks about is just have a plan to start the year. Here are the roles, whether it's 2 weeks or 10 games or 5 games or whatever it is. This is what everybody will do in this chunk of the season. And at the end of that, we'll reevaluate. If somebody's looked so good in practice or in spot minutes that we have to give them more time, then, roles will shift. But at least you've gone into the season with something that looks like a plan that you can kind of adjust from. And that was clearly not the case last season. And that was probably, I think, the entire fan base's biggest frustration, that you just didn't hear, the players had to get the roles and responsibilities talk together. I mean, that still blows my mind, to be honest.
Right. Exactly. It's frustrating to watch. I would be very frustrated if this season started and I saw them try to fit 12 people in just to keep everyone happy.
Yep. Agreed. All right. So let's say we're going Dinwiddie, Beal, Kuzma, Hachimura. Who is the 5th starter here? You got a couple options. It seems like Thomas Bryant won't be ready to start the season. So realistically, it's probably Gafford or Montrezl Harrell. Who would you go with and why? So
to me, it's definitely Daniel Gafford. I think the conversation really is Montrezl Harrell has been always successful in that 6-man role. He's 6'7", I think, generously speaking, probably 6'7". He's not a good defensive player, but his job is to eat against second units, beat them with energy. I remember, even frankly, like when the Clippers came here, and even when we went there, he would just, when he saw Thomas Bryant guarding him, he would just go at him, like absolutely just shred him into pieces. And that's what you want. You want him in his 25-minute per game role off the bench, maybe 20 to 20, depending on how the matchups are on a nightly basis. If there's a team with a 5 that's kind of like working him, then maybe you kind of limit those minutes a bit. So the way I see it is he's the backup, I think, regardless of who is the starter. At least that's the way I would view it. To me, the question is when Brian comes back, who is the starter? And I think one thing, and I talked to you all about this a little bit offline, one thing that bothers me when the conversation occurs on this is everyone's like, people love to say, oh, we got to get better on defense. Oh, we got to get better on defense. But I think in the kind of analytics, and I'm not anti-analytics at all, in the analytics and spacing era, people just see 3-point percentage and assume, hey,
there's
we
no
got to play that guy.
context to it.
No context to it. So any conversation you hear about this is, well, Thomas Bryant shoots 41% from 40% from 3-point line and has a ridiculous effective field goal percentage. So when he's healthy, he has to start. Well, Daniel Gafford also has a pretty crazy efficient. He doesn't shoot threes, but he changed the game defensively. So I kind of looked at some numbers here, did a little more homework.
Love it.
And kind of
somebody on the show has to.
So the argument has been that you can't take Thomas Bryant off because of his offense. So I pulled some on-off numbers just for context. So Thomas Bryant, kind of going back the last 3 years. Last year was obviously a small sample size. And I'm just going to give you kind of his net rating on and off for each season. So this past season, 20 to 21. On, they had a negative 2.1 net rating. Off, they had a negative 1.4 net rating. The year before that, on, negative 6.6, off, negative 2.9. The year before that, when I think he was mostly playing off the bench the first year he came here from
Mhm.
LA. On negative 3.6, off negative 2.3. So in the 3 seasons that he's played here, they have been better when he's off the court than when he's on. And I think that speaks to really not his, like, he's a hyper efficient offensive player. It probably there's these numbers aren't absolute. There's context to it. There's who he's playing with. There's lineups like lineups that he's going against. So there's definitely context to that. But I think what it speaks to is kind of the defensive issues that he brings to the table. Now the argument is that his offense is so good that you can't keep him, like you need to play him. He'll open the floor. The 3-point argument to me is a little silly because he's never made more than one 3-point shot per game, 3-point attempt per game. He's never made more than one. I mean, so no team is going to change how they defend the floor and let Brad Beal have a clear path to the lane because they're too afraid to leave Thomas Bryant. And that's kind of my main issue when people say, oh, well, he's a 40% 3-point shooter. What, I mean, you tell me, do you think someone is going to say, hey, we can't leave him, so you're on an island against Brad Beal?
Yeah, maybe for one big possession, but not for the course of a game.
Right. And then the other thing that is, so I pulled up his offensive rating for the past 3 seasons. So it's last season 113.6, the year before that 109.4, and the year before that 109. Daniel Gafford's offensive rating last year was 116.8.
Yeah.
So when everyone keeps saying you can't, Bryant over Gafford, because, well, not everyone, I'm not going to say everyone. The argument that people who are pro Bryant make is you have to have him because of his offense. Well, the offense actually functioned at its highest level than it ever has with Thomas Bryant, with Daniel Gafford on the floor. Mm-hmm. And I think it's just because of the 3-point shooting. When in fact, there's something to vertical spacing. There's the lob threat that he provides that Bryant doesn't. And that is something that like catches defenses off guard. And then like, just last thing I wanted to add here, people talk about the effective field goal percentage. Daniel Gafford's effective field goal percentage last year was 68.4%. Bryant last season was 69.8. 2 years before, 62.6 and 64.8. So when the argument is, oh, he's so efficient, you can't not start him. You have to also say that Gafford is also hyper efficient.
All great points. I think I've been sort of, more pro Bryant as a player than most. I think one of the things he actually, the best value he brings, in my opinion, is that he just runs the floor hard as shit. Like the shooting is nice, but it's actually like, I am going to dead sprint every time, we're on offense. And if you've got Embiid chasing you or somebody like that, like I actually think that's a reasonable value. And that's my one concern about Gafford is just, you're 24 years old and you can't play 20 minutes a game because, quote, you play so hard that you're not in shape enough to play that long. Like hopefully he's been on the track or the treadmill all off season or whatever it is. So assuming the conditioning thing isn't as big a deal, I'm totally in favor of him being the starter. And then, you do whatever it is with Harrell or Bryant, off the bench. And to me, they're kind of similar players who could play similar roles, not great defensively, might get bullied a little, but they're going to make another team work. They're going to eat against backup centers.
Right.
I think that's their best path to, like, again, talking about what we talked about before, but like balanced first and second unit. I think he gives them an extra punch off the bench. So
I agree. And I think that's, like you said, that's where the redundancy is. It's really more Bryant versus Montrez. Mm-hmm. Montrez can't shoot, but that's really in terms of impact, in terms of like how efficient they are, how they attack second units with defensive issues. That's where they're redundant, I think. Yep. I think Gafford, assuming the conditioning issues and he could stay out of foul trouble, are, assuming those two things, I would start him and then kind of see how Harrell starts. And then you could kind of slowly work Bryant back in, because there are going to be nights where someone rolls an ankle, someone is out for a reason, and you're going to have to play all three during the course of the season. So I think in that situation, I think the forwards, they might be too deep. I don't want to say too deep, but you know what I mean? Like someone's going to have to sit who maybe shouldn't sit. I think at the center position, though, that combination of three can work for an entire season, but I would 100% start Gafford. I think one last thing, the game last season, I believe, where they beat the Pelicans, he stopped Zion at the rim like 3-4 straight times. Yep. That's just something that neither Bryant or Montrez could do. So if they were playing, Zion makes those attempts and we don't win that game. He's just a big game changer. His His free throw shooting has improved. So I think he's not going to be someone that you're worried that they put him at the free throw line. He just, like you said, he has to get his condition, whatever's up with his conditioning, he has to get that taken care of. And he just has to stay out of foul trouble.
Let's take Bryant sort of out of the equation just now, because they say December, shit happens. Maybe that's January, whatever. And they might weirdly heavily feature him when he comes back to try to trade him. But just to start the year, I think it wouldn't surprise me to see Gafford start, but Harrell get more total minutes. Does that seem reasonable to you?
That could seem reasonable. I could see Gafford playing 20 minutes a game and then Harrell playing maybe 24 to 25. Yeah. And then I can honestly see them maybe going small, depending on who they're playing. Maybe going KCP, Kuzma, and Rui if they're playing a team that's only playing big wings to close a game, for example. But that team, that's a specific. You can't play Rui against an actual center, but against teams that don't have an actual center and are going to play just a bunch of, like 3, 4, 6, 8 wings, maybe that's how they close sometimes.
You're playing the Suns and they've got Cam Johnson and Crowder as their two bigs on the court. Like something like that would work, I think. All right. So we've locked in Gafford as the starter. It's clear that both KCP and Harrell are going to play some minutes. So we're already at 7 guys. Presumably you need a backup point guard. I personally am happy that they brought Neto back. I liked what he did last year. Like theoretically, I like the idea of Aaron Holiday. It's a little weird to me that he couldn't beat out TJ McConnell last year as the backup. Like if you're a reasonable shooter and defensive analytics darling, which McConnell's like very good defensively too, but he literally cannot shoot beyond like 5 feet. That would make me a little nervous. So I think Neto is at the very least your insurance policy there and on a cheap deal. But do you see both of those guys in the rotation? Do you see one of them? Like how do you see that kind of shaking out?
So I was glad Neto came back. I think part of it might be because they're going to have to do some load management with Dinwiddie coming off the ACL.
Yeah, agreed.
If they play back-to-backs, maybe he sits out early in the season, or at least they got to limit his minutes. So I think that in that role, that on those nights, it'll be interesting to see actually who they start. Holiday can make some threes, and the defense is there, but I didn't see much else. So it's one of those where I'm curious to see how Wes plays it. Like, is he going to give him the first shots and stats who they made that draft day trade for? Or and he makes more money than Neto, or are they going to just let them play it out, compete in camp, and may the best man win? I think Neto should be, based on what I've seen, but I'm open to seeing how the preseason plays out.
Yeah, I think that's the answer, is like maybe you kind of assume Neto's the incumbent, and then if he gets outplayed, he gets outplayed. I mean, last year's coaching staff, they would have just played together, and we wouldn't have to worry about it. But I think, Neto makes sense if he's on the court with Dinwiddie some, like you could do a little 1-2 there. And maybe Holiday makes a little more sense next to Beal. He'll play a little more perimeter defense. He's probably maybe the scrappiest, point of attack defender of that group, I would think. And you can let Beal kind of handle the ball a little bit and do his thing more.
If you have Denny being kind of a secondary facilitator and Beal maybe staggering back in with the second unit, or Dinwiddie, then like you said, maybe you have a Holiday there, because really all you're looking for is just be a pest on defense. Like make life difficult for whoever the point guard is on the floor and make your open threes, because that's really all they want out of the position. So I think in that role, maybe it does make more sense, because it does seem like they do want to at least give Denny the opportunity to be more of a secondary playmaker this year.
I think there's at least a reasonable shot that both of them are at least somewhat in the rotation early. And that puts us, at 9 guys. And then the question becomes, you've probably got to find some minutes for Denny at this point. Hopefully he's healthy-ish. We didn't see him in summer league, but they said he should be good to go. So that puts you at 10. Davis Bertans puts you at 11. And then you've got this year's draft picks in Corey Kispert and Isaiah Todd. I don't think Todd plays many minutes with the Wizards this year at all, but
unless something goes terribly wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
And they do actually finally like,
blow things
like,
up.
Yeah, that's the only real way that I would see Todd playing. Kispert's interesting. He didn't shoot great in summer league, but he showed that when they generated a good look for him, that the NBA range wasn't any issue for him. Like there was that one game that he just I think he made maybe 5 or 6 threes. And
if he made 2 more threes over summer league, he would have been an almost 40% 3-point shooter, and no one would be talking about it. That's what's so crazy with that sample size too.
Exactly. But it did not look like 3-point range, the NBA line would be any issue for him.
Right.
And he moved well, like everything that you expected from him. He moved well without the ball.
Mm-hmm.
He could shoot the ball, and he showed some ability to beat a closeout. He's not going to go 5-6 dribbles off that, but he could take a couple dribbles, find his spot from there. So he actually is ready, I think, playing with better players, because that role, like he's ready for that role. But Davis Bertans is making $80 million, and they either have to see if he's back and they're committed to him, or at least even bring up his trade value so they can move him. So I think he gets the first look. I do wonder if so the whole Westbrook trade happened on draft day, I believe, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think kind of looking back at the season.
Yep.
And maybe I wonder if their draft board was set and they didn't want to pivot last minute, because they went from needing a wing, needing shooters, to kind of having a glut of wings and a glut of not a glut of shooters, but just enough shooters that maybe if they had more time to kind of evaluate what they have as a result of the trade, maybe they changed their draft board. Or maybe he was just there and they were adamant, that's our guy. We'll figure out what to do with Davis Bertans later.
I think they made such an emphasis on we need shooting. Like even if all these guys come back, Bertans looks like he should look, and all these things. Like even if you make the trade, it's still, you can never have too much shooting. That's partly what I assumed. I think Duarte was probably their guy. Just they raved about that interview. The things he talked about, it sounded like a very in-depth process that they put him through. So I mean, maybe not the guy, but he was one of the guys in the mix for them. Trey Murphy probably got some looks, but maybe they thought that was a reach. Although in retrospect, that might have been
looked pretty good.
Yeah, that might have been the right pick. So I'm with you. I think that was like, hey, we're locked in on like a semi-ready to contribute guy that can shoot some threes for us at the wing, and that's who we're going to go with. And maybe Kispert is more of a 3, so that's where we have the biggest hole on our roster. And Duarte maybe is more of a 2. I don't know, but Murphy's.
I think
maybe
hindsight,
more of a 4.
if Duarte was there, he would make sense from a roster
with this
structuring
group.
Because they need the guard depth.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he wasn't there, so it was taken out of their control. And we'll see how it goes. I just can't imagine him playing early, but unless something happens at camp with someone else, but we'll see.
Yeah, same. Do you see Kispert or Denny spending any time in the G League this year, at the very least to start the season, maybe?
I think we'll definitely see Todd in the G League. Denny, it sounds like they want him to be the backup 3. Yeah. So if he just does not have a good game. So he had a couple. The Denny conversation was interesting last year. I was a big fan of his coming out of the draft. I was excited that he slipped to 9 and they drafted him. And he started off the season well, but there were some glaring holes in his game that people seem to just not factor in. Like he can't dribble with his left hand.
Period.
No. And he can't, in his shot, once it disappeared, he never was able to get it back. And he doesn't get to the free throw line, probably because he could only dribble with his right. And he might just shy away from contact, getting to the line because he's just a questionable shooter. Those are big issues. We don't know where he is in his recovery. It seems like you said, he seems like he's healthy. We don't know where he is in his development. So if he comes to camp and all of a sudden now his shot looks better, he could dribble a little bit more with his left and they're playing more to his passing and he's kind of playing that point forward role, great. But if he comes back to camp and those holes are still there and are as glaring, then it would probably make sense to get him some G League time. But I think that would also be them. I don't think that's what they want to see happen.
Agreed.
It would not be a good sign if he starts the season in the G League. Kispert, you might as well have him practice and play some games, because if he's not in the rotation early, I don't think that's like the setting that's going to be best for him, because a lot of his game is going to be depending on high quality guard play, setting him up for open threes. I'm just not sure. It's Cassius Winston. He might be better with. I'm not sure. It can't hurt him, you know.
They had, I mean, obviously this is 2 years removed now, and it'll be a different coach this time around. But under Ryan Richmond, they had like really good, solid point guard play on the go-go the last go round, and so that might actually give him an opportunity to like, run some offense, like kind of ease into things, and maybe it would give Denny a chance to kind of come back and, like you said, get a little confidence back. It's like a couple minor league starts for a pitcher to start the season or whatever after an injury, but I think there's almost no chance they put Denny there just from an optic standpoint. Kispert, if he plays some here or there, while the team's at home, it wouldn't surprise me, but I definitely don't think he'll spend like large stints with the go-go either.
Right. I don't think he'll benefit too much from it, but if they, like you said, if they're home and they have an off day and he could go practice with the team and play that night, well, why not? Just keep that shot, get in rhythm, keep that shot going, what have you.
And we saw a couple situations 2 years ago where both teams had games on the same days and they were staggered enough that like Admiral Schofield played 25 minutes for the go-go and then was active that night for the Wizards. So it could also be a situation like that. And, young guys, you just want to get them reps, I think. So it might make sense.
Agreed.
We talked a lot about, are there enough minutes for Neto and Aaron Holiday right out of the gate? I see no path to playing time for Cassius Winston right now, assuming everybody stays healthy.
I agree with you. I don't see how he gets on the floor.
Unless, something disastrous happens.
Right.
But even then, like let's say Dinwiddie isn't ready and takes a step back or whatever. I expect them to go pretty heavy. Neto, Holiday, Beal, Avdia as the ball handlers. So at what point do you cut bait? I mean, they added him back on a two-way, so it's obviously not a big commitment, but at what point is like it fair to say this Cassius Winston experiment has not been like an overwhelming success?
Yeah, I wasn't surprised that they brought him back on the two-way, but to me, he would have to show a lot in camp for me to confidently keep him on that two-way.
Agreed.
He did not look comfortable from the NBA three-point line at all. It looked like he was kind of putting everything he had to get to the ball to the rim. He's not the biggest point guard either. He did not look like an NBA player when he played. So they're also like, he's the fourth point guard. I guess maybe you could keep him around because Holiday and Neto both are unrestricted free agents. I think Holiday may be restricted after the season, but both are free agents after the season. So maybe he's like a succession plan to be the backup point guard. But do I really think that they would trust him going into the 2022-23 season? No. You would almost, it's kind of a little, have they filled the second two-way spot yet?
Not to my knowledge. The last I saw, they had exhibit 10s for Jordan Goodwin, Jay Huff, and I want to say Holmesley.
I wasn't sure if they had signed him yet or if he was still kind of, I thought they might be trying to get him under the last two-way spot, but I don't know if I've heard anything on it.
As of Basketball Reference today, they only officially have Cassius on two-way.
Gotcha. Okay. I mean, I would have tried to take a shot on someone who maybe projected maybe like a younger wing or maybe even another center, because you have Bryant coming off the injury, but him and Montrezl Harrell are both unrestricted free agents after the season. So, let's see. I wasn't really inspired by their kind of signing their summer league team that looked totally underwhelming to all their contracts to fill out their G League roster. But let's see how it goes.
Jaime Echenike didn't intrigue you?
Oh, he got to crack me up a few times. He had some funny plays. He threw the ball off the guy, right? On the other team?
Yeah, I think so. I'm trying to remember. He also got hurt that same game, I think, too.
Yeah. So I was like, I laughed when he threw the ball. It was totally avoidable. He could have thrown it off his leg, thrown it off the guy's arm, but he just went, I'm going to throw it off this guy's face.
You got to love it. I respect the balls to pull that in an NBA game here, too. All right. So we've kind of run through who's the key guys in the rotation. And either way, I actually think the go-go will be pretty good this year based on who these guys kind of trickle down from the big team. But there was a Wizards After Dark in the last week that Fred Katz of The Athletic does. And by the way, Fred does a fantastic job in my opinion overall, but he brought in one of their sort of national writers, Dave DeFore, to talk about the Wizards' expectations for this season, and you and I both listened to this, and a couple of the comments from Dave specifically caught our ears a little bit here about the Wizards projecting as a bottom 5 defensive team, and they might be better off just sort of punting on defense. I actually think this has the makings of the best Wizards defensive team in, like, I don't know, at least 5 years, maybe even more than that, to be honest. That's crazy, right? I mean,
I think it's crazy because they made their run when Gafford came to the team and triggered their defense. And that run was, look, let's not make it something that it wasn't, but that was some of the best basketball they've played in years.
Yeah.
So why would you punt on something that they had success with last season to go back to a style of play that had them in 30-win territory the 2 years prior to that? Like, are we really trying to recreate the 1920 Wizards team where they were losing to the Clippers 150 to 135?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's, I mean, so I listened to it, and I think I reached out to you, and I asked you to listen to it and kind of gauge your thoughts. Fred does a great job. I think some of my contention about the Bryant stuff I already talked about. I think he's like kind of left out context in regards to how efficient Gafford actually is. David Dufour is a great guy also. And like sometimes when a national guy comes on, they're just not as in tune.
It's not his expertise. Yeah.
Not his expertise, but kind of complaining about the defense, saying maybe at best case they're bottom 5 when they were actually 20th in the league last season. And if you look at where they were from when Gafford came on, they were much better than that.
They're like top half. Yeah, right.
Yeah, top half of the league. And that's like, then to say, hey, let's all in on offense. It's kind of like what we talked about earlier. National guys want to see Beal traded, and they want to just see 150 points a game, So they're not actually interested in talking about anything that would actually benefit the Wizards. So that whole conversation I kind of took, and I was like, Fred does a great job. I just totally hated that whole discussion on the Wizards.
In the odd chance that you're listening to this, Fred, you need to drop the smackdown on people when they slight the Wizards defensively now. But if you just look at it like position by position, I mean, Westbrook had some moments defensively last year, but I think I'm willing to say that he was underwhelming defensively over the whole course of the season. I think Dinwiddie, assuming he's healthy, is an upgrade at that position. Beal is Beal. I mean, I'm underwhelmed by the defense, but if you got to score 30 a game, so be it. Maybe if he has less scoring load this year, he has a little more incentive to play some defense to go with it. And then at the wing position, there's no way that whoever they start at the 3 isn't better defensively, in my opinion.
Right.
Hopefully Rui gets better, I mean.
And I think even with Rui, so Rui was one of the worst powerful. If you look at just DRPM,
sure.
I think he was maybe out of power forwards, one of the bottom in the league.
Yeah.
Last year, he had jumped up maybe 60 spots amongst power forwards to like 20th in the league. So that's just in his second season. I don't think we decide, okay, he jumped to that. Now he's done growing. So I think you'll see some continued growth there. Kuzma has already shown some growth on defense. KCP is a very good known defender.
Sure.
Gafford, ideally, if he's healthy, can't that shot altering will help the defense. So like you said, there's definitely hope for them to be at least middle of the pack defensively, maybe even a little better. I think the key is the guards. Dinwiddie adds some size. So that's good. It's always good to be longer on the floor. Beal has to re-engage defensively.
Yeah.
And I understand the last few years, the expectations were a little different.
Sure.
And his responsibility was scoring, and he was kind of just too tired to play defense. They have a number of guys now who maybe they don't have someone like Westbrook who could have a 40-point triple-double, but they have Kuzma could score 20 on a given night. Rui could score 20 on a given night. KCP could hit 5-6 threes on a given night. Dinwiddie could score 20 to 30 on a given night. They have so many. Harrell could do the same. They have so much more depth, so many more guys who could score between 10 to 25 on a given night. Beal doesn't need for his field goal attempts and his usage to continue its incline. He could bring that number down, and he could focus in. If he really wants to win, if he really is worried about that versus 2K ratings and what have you, he could re-engage defensively. And if he does that, the team will look a lot better. And because right now he's actually, if I was being 100% honest, he's my biggest worry defensively amongst the starters.
I agree.
Yeah.
And like you said, he's shown he can do it. Like he's never been like a great defender, but if he's just like league average, I mean,
that'll be huge.
Yeah, that's a huge boost for them if he's the worst of the 5 defenders on the court to start a game, and he's at least marginal. I mean,
exactly. Yeah.
The thing with Beal, like I want to say it was 2 years ago, like they started the season against the Mavericks, and like he wanted to guard Doncic late and things like that. Like he wanted to take the challenge and show people he could do it, but it just by like week 2, he was like, all right, this isn't happening. So
yeah. And even then, wanting to take the challenge, hopefully the coach can say, okay, I know you want this, but let's not put you on Jason Tatum to end the game because he could shoot over you. Let's not put you on Luka because look, and this is I'm not trying, look, I'm 5'8", but Beal's
6'3".
Beal's 6'3". He cannot defend a 6'8" wing.
And Beal himself said that. Like I actually asked him the question in that first game where Tatum kind of went nuts, and he's like, the guy's literally 6 or 7 inches taller than me. Like there's only so much I can do.
Right. And so they should not put him in that position, nor should he ask to be put in that position.
But if now all of a sudden all he has to do is chase around Patty Mills, hopefully that's a little better for him.
Hopefully it's a little better for him. I was a little concerned. So why I'm a little skeptical about the defense turning is they got to the playoffs. So now it's about winning, right?
Yeah.
They got to the Philadelphia series. He wanted to get to there. That was his showcase.
Mm-hmm.
And Seth Curry, Korkmaz, what have you, just went to work.
Yeah.
And there was no defense from either Beal or Westbrook. So I get the argument that, hey, we're a 30-win team. He's scoring 35 points a game. Let's not expect him to play defense. Now you're in the playoffs, and now you have to play defense. And he still didn't. So that's why I'm a little skeptical. But, I was encouraged that Wes Unseld Jr. in his introductory press conference said, we need to have buy-in and included Beal in that. So he didn't say that Beal has bought in. He said, I'm looking to see buy-in. So he kind of put the onus on him. And I liked hearing that.
There were a bunch of times last year where Beal came out after a loss where he played bad defensively and said, guys have to play better defense. And Scott Brooks was like, yeah, I agree. Guys have to play better defense.
Yeah.
Like you got to hold everybody accountable. And one of the biggest arguments I've made for Thomas Bryant is that some of the times he looked bad on defense to me because he was just put at a severe disadvantage because they had no perimeter defense. Granted, he's still not good. I just think he's slightly better than he's been able to show. And I'm hoping that that's the case with Rui too, where like, he maybe he doesn't have to guard KD every possession. And now that's a little easier for him and he's got some help and they can switch things. So I just think a better system and with like better, more competent defenders around them, hopefully, the rising tide lifts all ships kind of thing applies to their defense.
Right. If you think about it, it's a little silly. I think Bryant is going to always struggle defensively, but he could be, like you said, a little better.
Sure.
If he had help on the perimeter, more help.
Serviceable enough defensively.
Exactly. In Rui's case, it's funny. Everyone's like, oh, his defense is defense. But they have him guarding LeBron. They have him guarding Tatum. They have him guarding Jaylen Brown.
With no help.
Kevin Durant with no help. So this is a guy everyone's like, oh, he has defensive issues, yet he is the one tasked with the most difficult assignment with no help.
Yeah.
And for the fact that his numbers improved like they did shows me that there's still more there to tap into.
And this is what we were going back and forth about on Twitter a little bit, is like there were some big lapses last year, right? But that's also everyone on the court was doing that. And it's hard to pinpoint like whose missed assignment that kind of thing is when everybody is running around like a chicken with their head cut off.
Right. I think you and I talked about the Dallas game where should he have helped or should he have left a 3-point shooter in the corner when they were up 2? And I remember that discussion, but it's like, and like you may be 100% right. Maybe he should not have helped. Worst case, you go to overtime.
Sure.
Also, just any player, any forward, any center on this team would benefit if the guards just didn't let their man around, like at least show, like make it a little difficult. Not like, hey, I'm just going to dribble with my right hand and just dribble right around you, Make them do some work. Make them do something that they show in their summer highlight videos,
I just want to hear that like whatever they did out on the floor, it was executing on what Wes wanted them to do.
Right.
Like there were too many times last year where it was like, oh, this guy broke away from the system or the scheme or whatever, and that's kind of the frustrating thing. All right, just to close this out here, we got to address this a little bit here because I think you and I have been in lockstep. I've said on this show multiple times, like I just did not enjoy, and this was prior to him being a Wizard. Russell Westbrook was not the most aesthetically pleasing basketball player for me, but I respect the hell out of like the effort, and I mean he is a historically impactful player. Like
Right.
I just
First ballot
don't
Hall
think,
of Fame,
yeah,
like just all timer.
I did not like the fit next to Beal. It's two guys that are sort of not, they're both high usage. They're both not sort of defensive oriented. Like that's not who I would ideally have liked for this team. And he was super impactful in them making their playoff run. He also, they put so much stock in him and his impact on the game, and him starting off poorly also resulted in a slow start. So
Right.
I think all of those things can be true. And if you say them, you're not a Russ hater or you're not killing the guy. Like I hope they go win a ring this year. Like the Wizards aren't winning one. I'm good for him. If that guy gets a ring, cool. And he very well could. And I actually like that fit for him more than most people seem to, but we can do that another time. But you said basically the same thing on Twitter and got crushed as being crazy and hating. And he was the only reason the Wizards have been relevant in the last 2 decades, which I don't even know what half that shit means. So I want to let you take the floor here and
So I wrote a tweet that basically it was just like an off-season dump of just random thoughts about like summer highlight workout videos, what have you. And one of them, like number 10 out of like 13 that I wrote from the Bulls Forever account was, I'm not going to miss Westbrook's style of play, but if like 1/10 of the players in the league played as hard as he did, the league would be 10 times better. I thought that was kind of like, I didn't think that was anything blasphemous.
Sure.
I was, like you said, I respect the guys. I respect how hard he plays. And you could see that this season. You could see like for years, they were always the too cool for school Wizards. Ted Leonsis used to call them that, and they would lose games they shouldn't have lost. He tried hard every single night, and I'll never criticize that. But his style of play was not one that I enjoyed watching. And I can't imagine anyone, if they were like talking their ideal basketball, would say, I like watching a guard who cannot shoot a lot, and then have a bunch of 5 to 6 turnovers a game. Yeah. It's just like when he was on, it was great to watch. Like those nights, like the Brooklyn game where like that super was fantastic. Yeah. But we know that's not sustainable. Yeah. And like, it's just not fun watching two guys kind of just monopolize the basketball and everyone else standing in the corner. And then when those two guys are off, then everyone's like, well, everyone else sucks. It's everyone else's fault that they have to shoot that much. When in fact, that's just how they play. So it's not just him. The last time John Wall played for the Wizards, the whole everybody eats thing was kind of still something. Yeah. And they just weren't, and I don't know if it's a Scott Brooks thing because he's kind of a common denominator both times, but John Wall and Russell Westbrook are both very ball dominant, high usage, high time of possession guards. Neither of them can really shoot well. So you have that coupled with Beal, whose shooting and usage just continues to go up and up. And it just wasn't fun. So that's all I wrote. Of course, the Colts, the Russ Hive, whatever you want to call them, they came out, they were upset. They were like, how could you, like the whole point of this being the most relevant season, that's just was this season that relevant? Was there
didn't do much for me personally.
Didn't do anything for me. We got beat pretty badly, like in the first round, and kind of all the issues that we had with his play that we did not always see kind of when they went on their hot run came back in that playoff series. Like, so it just wasn't fun to watch. And like saying that something's not fun to watch doesn't mean I'm hating on the guy. It's just, exactly. Like his style of play it's just not for me. I like to see ball movement. I like to see everybody kind of get shots. Look, Tommy Shepard, when he took the job, said he likes to see the ball move. He likes to see athletic players uninhibited. What we saw last year was the exact opposite of that, and probably has something to do with why Scott Brooks is gone, and maybe even something to do with why Russell Westbrook is gone. Sure. So it's just not it for me, And like people just totally ignored the second half part of the tweet and just like ran with the first, and we're just all furious. At the same time, I kind of enjoyed it. It's like that was my goodbye to the Russ Hive.
It's funny. It's like, well, if you guys have moved on from our irrelevant franchise, why are you still paying so much attention to what we think about him? So
Yeah, they're spending a lot of time talking about the Wizards, and I was like, if you're following a first ballot Hall of Famer city to city, then why are you so worried about us?
keep it moving.
Although it does speak to like that's a first ballot Hall of Famer star. That's
Yeah.
someone players that fans come out to watch.
Yeah.
Yet Washington fans are not really. I don't see that many upset that he's gone.
Sure.
And again, it's not a reflection of him. I think it's more his style of play. I
Agreed.
think as a person, people loved having him here. People thought he was great. It's just people just don't. That's just not a fun style of basketball.
I think some of it's bang for your buck too. Like where he's at in his career is not a $47 million a night player. And it's not
Right.
that he's not good or impactful. It's just, it's hard to win when he's paid like a top 10 player in the league when he's not. And by the way, I can make some of those same arguments for Beal in some circumstances too.
Right.
And so it's not an attack on him. Like I loved the first couple years that Harden was in Houston, where he was like point guard Harden, and they just
Mhm.
try to run on everything, and he facilitated. The last couple years, like what he did in Brooklyn, actually a lot of this year, like that's fun to watch when
Right.
he is dribble 100 times a possession. I don't enjoy that either. And some of what Doncic does. So it's not a Russ thing. It's just ball movement is more fun. It's
No,
exciting.
it's like
to see
it was
the
a wall
defense.
thing after the 16-17 season also.
Mhm.
Like that season, the ball moved a little bit more. They were a little
Yep.
deeper in the lineup. But then once Wolf season, remember, I think once all that stuff happened, then it became about let me make my MVP run and let me shoot more. At least it just seemed that way.
Sure.
And it was a tough watch. Like you said, Harden, I enjoyed early and I enjoyed watching him in Brooklyn, but they were great. Like they pushed the KD version of the Warriors to game 7, but it still wasn't fun to watch him play. Like, because it was just two players, and especially one in his case, would just dribble, dribble, dribble. Every possession was the exact same. Like when you think of good basketball, you think of transition, you think of a lot of like hockey assists, all that
Mhm.
type of stuff. That to me is enjoyable. I mean, sure, so I'm not denying that some people probably do like just ISO
That's fine.
balls,
Yeah.
but to each their own.
Yeah, I'm totally with you too. And it's just one of those things where like, okay, if your argument is, well, what was, Westbrook supposed to do? His teammates sucked. Well, yeah, they were terrible. But when that much of your salary cap goes to certain players, you also can't surround him with multiple Hall of Famers and a deep bench. Like
Right.
it's, if you want to be compensated like a top 10 player, you have to produce like a top 10 player. And that means your teammates will not be as good. So there is some amount of, hey, you will have to carry them. So I think that's sort of just like I don't know. If you just disagree, that's fine. Like, hey, I love to watch that. I love to watch the guy rebound. Like that was amazing to me. But just be objective. That's all I ever ask for.
Exactly. Don't just give me his assist numbers. If one guy just has the ball all the time, his assist numbers are going to be good.
Yeah.
Like there's context to that. And it's also like, don't complain about the teammates when on nights where the teammates are playing well. Like I think Gafford was shooting almost 70% in the playoffs. Rui had like a 65% true shooting percentage in the playoffs. Hey, you're not shooting well. The guys that you've been telling, we always hear, oh, they're encouraging Rui to do more. They're trying to get him to be more aggressive.
Yeah, then
hey,
empower
he's
him.
making he's shooting 70% this series. Why don't you pass him the ball more? Put it on him to fail, not just say like I'm not going to pass it to him, because then that the whole argument about the teammates runs hollow when you ignore the teammates even when they're hot.
Yeah, you nailed it. All right, it's been an hour. I appreciate all the time. You've been very generous with your afternoon here. Anything you want to leave us with? Anything you want to plug?
Nothing I want to plug. I am I think I am going to do a little writing on the whole center position.
Okay.
Kind of my, and look, I'm open. Like I didn't want it to come off like I'm anti Thomas Bryant. I just my argument is you just can't keep saying, well, the coach can scheme around subpar defensive players.
It's the objective thing again.
Yeah. If you have a good defensive player, put him on the floor.
Yeah.
And if you're making the argument, don't say one guy's hyper efficient while ignoring the fact that the other guy is hyper efficient. So I think I'm just going to kind of put that all in a piece. it's still off season mode, but like I think on the Bullets Forever side, we're going to start ramping up very soon, wrapping up the Mystic season also. So definitely stay on the lookout. We'll be it's already the middle of September, so we're going to be at it soon. You know,
Yep.
yeah.
Training camp time. All right, thank you, sir. Appreciate the time, and I look forward to doing this again. A couple weeks into the season, maybe we can see where we're at and what we got wrong here.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.